and welcome on a rainy afternoon. As many of us said when we came in here, only Dr. Matt Kerbal could get a crowd on a rainy afternoon of students who are eager to be here. Usually, for an ACS event, we either have to have the carrot out there, like free food, or the stick, meaning you have to come. But with Matt Kerbal, we knew we needed none of that you would come willingly of yourself. Yesterday, I met with a former student of mine, David Lawler, who's right here. So I said, David, what are you doing tomorrow afternoon? You want to hear Matt Kerbal? He said, oh, Dr. Kelly, that's already on my calendar. Some of my friends and I are already planning to go. I heard him speak last year, and I always will come back again. True statement, right, David?
That's true.
Yeah, all right. So without further ado, let me introduce to you the person who I think is the most engaging, stimulating, dynamic, peripatetic, meaning he walks around all the time while he talks. Kills you with the statistics he knows, charms you with the anecdotes he knows his backwards and forwards, he knows his politics, whatever question you have to ask him, he'll have the answer. The most dynamic person we have on campus, Dr. Matt Kerbal, and a longtime friend.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear him back? It's okay. I can tell you, the first rule of politics is lowering expectations. So I don't know if I can match that. So I'm going to try. We may want to break out the free food in 15 minutes if I can't do it. In any event, excuse me, I do want to welcome you and thank you for coming. And I just want to warn you in advance that I've got a cough and I'm losing my voice. And so I'll do my best to make it through this. But if I get raspy as we go along, I do apologize for that. So what I want to talk about today, and I promise not to take too much time to do it, I want to give everyone, if I can, a good overview of what happened on Tuesday. Because we all know the top line, we all know the headline, which is that the Republicans came storming back and by very large numbers reclaimed control of the House of Representatives. But how to characterize this? I was interviewed last night by a TV reporter, and he asked me if I could give him one word to describe what happened. One word. Usually TV reporters give you 4 seconds. He wanted me to give him one word. So the word I gave him was convulsion. That we had a political convulsion. And it's not the first one in recent years. In fact, it's the 3rd in a row. This is the 3rd wave election that we've had in a row. So one of the things I want to talk about today is what that means and what difference it makes. So I think I'd like to start up by talking a little bit about first what happened on Tuesday, and then talk a little about what it means for the next 2 years, and then conclude by talking a little bit about what it means politically for the broader picture going forward. So let's look first at the numbers. We'll go to the numbers. Republicans take the House with at least 60, could be 65, may even be a little bit more than that, seats, which is a huge swing. We haven't had a swing this large since 1948. So it was an enormous swing in the Republicans' favor. The reason the number could go up is because some of the races are still too close to call. In the Senate, the Democrats ended up losing 6 seats. There are still 2 seats left to be determined. I think when those ballots are all counted, it's going to be where it is now. I think it'll be a swing of 6 seats to the Republicans, which means the Democrats' majority is sustained. They'll continue to control the Senate, but by much smaller numbers, 53-47, most likely. My voice is going already, excuse me. I want to try the mic again. Let me just see if I don't have to shout. How's this? Is this a little bit better? You can hear a little better? Okay, good. if I don't have to strain my voice, I think it'll be easier. And anyway, and then there were governorships. Republicans picked up what looks to be a net of at least 9 governorships. And in particular, most notably, they won the governorships of Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. That whole Rust Belt area. In fact, that's where the Democrats lost their House majority. They lost it in the Rust Belt. They did very badly in the Rust Belt. They held their own in the Northeast. They held their own out west. But in the economically devastated portions of the Midwest, that's where it went. And there's a reason for that. Because one of the big overarching issues was the economy. You really can't look at this election without looking at the economy. What we had was what we call a wave election. Now, a wave election has a couple of basic characteristics. One of them is the electorate is unevenly motivated. And those of you who follow politics know that for many, many months, political experts have been talking about something called the enthusiasm gap. That Republicans were just more motivated to vote than Democrats. Well, it turns out that there was a gap. And it wasn't so much that Democrats were unmotivated, so much as that Republicans were turbocharged. There were Republicans who've been dying to get out and vote since Obama took the oath of office. And this was the first chance they got. So the energy was all on one side. Because of that, the playing field tipped in one direction. And we saw this coming for many months. Of the seats that were in play, meaning they could have flipped from one side to the other, they were disproportionately Democratic-held seats. So the Democratic Party had far more at stake, far more in play than the Republican Party this year. And finally, we had the tendency for close races to move in one direction. When it's not a wave, when you don't have a wave building, the close races can often be determined by local factors, and they can move in different directions. In a wave election, they all tend to move in one direction. And in this case, they did. A lot of close races. Now, some Democrats were able to survive in the House. Excuse me. Some Democrats were able to survive and hold on. But they generally, when the races were close, within a point or two, generally favored the Republicans. And not just generally, by quite a large margin. So you put these factors in play. The uneven motivation, the uneven playing field, the tendency for things to move in one direction. That's the wave. Now we're getting special effects. That's the wave. And the wave built and developed and then broke ashore on Tuesday. But there was something interesting about this wave that made it a little different from the waves that we saw 2 years ago and 4 years ago, which were both waves that moved in the other direction. The first wave that I'm talking about in 2006 was an anti-Republican wave. That's where Democrats captured control of Congress. And then 2 years ago, Democrats padded those majorities and elected Barack Obama president. The difference between those two waves and this wave is you had a different dynamic, an additional dynamic that to a certain degree cut against the main dynamic. You had, I call it a riptide election. In a riptide, you've got a current that can cut in the other direction. And I think we saw an element of that here. And the irony is, the thing that caused the riptide is also the thing that propelled the tide. And that is the nature of the energy on the Republican right. We've probably all heard about the Tea Party and the Tea Party movement. And then there's a lot of confusion about who it is and what it is. But by and large, when you look at the data, people who identify with the Tea Party, it's not a political party, it's a movement. People who identify with the Tea Party are by and large Republicans. People who identified with the Tea Party on Tuesday voted over 90% for the Republican candidate. So they identify with Republicans. That was a tremendous advantage to the Republican side in terms of building this wave. It was an enormous advantage. But at the same time, it served to undercut some of what could have been a larger advantage. And we saw this particularly in the Senate. The Democrats, I said, held on to the Senate. They lost the House. Does anybody know the last time a major party going into an election, holding both houses of Congress, lost the House, but kept the Senate? Does anybody know when it happened last? When did it, do you know?
94.
Didn't happen in 94. Lost the House, kept the Senate. Never. It never happened. Since we've been, that's good. That's right, that's really good. Since we've been electing senators, it's never happened. So it's an anomaly. That makes it interesting to look at. Well, what I'm going to give you here is not so much data as theory. I'm going to give you an explanation for why I think that happened. If you look philosophically at the Tea Party and what they stand for, it tends to be an expression of libertarian thought, very strongly anti-government thought. Now, if you go back and you look at American political discourse, libertarian thought of this nature is outside what has traditionally been the mainstream of American discourse. Typically, for a very long time, if you look at Republicans and Democrats, you have really market conservatives on one side, social welfare liberals on the other side. There's general agreement on the existence of the welfare state. There's disagreement over what it should be, how large it should be, shape and size. Libertarian thought is different. It rejects the welfare state, rejects big government, rejects spending, rejects taxes, and in some instances, rejects government involvement in non-economic matters as well. Now, it's still difficult to get the votes of those voters who are not aligned with either political party and who can swing one way or the other. It's difficult to get their votes for a libertarian agenda in most places. Now, in the House, it's more difficult to know precisely when you go to vote for your representative. Maybe you weren't paying attention. Maybe you're not aware of the personalities. You're not aware of what they stand for. House races tend to be localized. They tend to be lower visibility races. Senate races are high visibility races. There's a lot of press coverage. So in a few instances, and in a few key instances, Republican nominees who got there by virtue of Tea Party backing got a lot of play. And in a few instances, some of the things they were saying didn't really sit well with the general electorate. In other words, they were too far out of the mainstream. Christine O'Donnell in Delaware, for instance, Sharon Angle in Nevada, where it just didn't really resonate with enough voters in the middle to put them over the top. Now, what those two states have in common, as well as Alaska, as well as Connecticut, as well as Colorado, as well as Kentucky, Florida, in all those states, establishment Republicans backed a candidate that lost. And that candidate lost because the energy in the Republican primaries came from the Tea Party voters. So in a primary, it's a smaller group of people voting. They made a huge difference. What did that mean in the general? Well, it meant that these candidates now had to face a broader electorate. And they had to do so under the bright lights of television scrutiny. And in Connecticut, in Delaware, in Nevada, in Colorado, they all lost. That's the Senate, right there. Now I can't tell you, because we can't prove it, we can't know, that if more mainstream Republicans, more traditional social conservative or fiscal conservative Republicans had been nominated, I can't tell you that they would have won. But I can tell you this, they probably would have won. If you go state by state, perhaps Connecticut, certainly Delaware, certainly Colorado. And look at Nevada. Harry Reid, the Democratic Senate leader. Harry Reid is so unpopular at home. His job approval ratings are in the upper 30% range. That's death in politics. Harry Reid had no business being reelected on Tuesday, and he won by 5 points. That, to me, is the Riptide. That's the effect that blunted the strength of the Republican wave. It didn't emerge in the House. It did emerge in the Senate. So, what does this mean? Let's talk about what this means for the next couple of years. And you'll excuse me for just a second. I'm trying to preserve my voice. Well, it means a couple of things. First of all, why is that happening? I don't know. First of all, when exit pollsters asked these unaffiliated voters, the independent voters, what do you want to see as a result of this election? One of the things they said was, we want people in Washington to listen to us. We want them to stop bickering and stop arguing. So, one of the effects of this election will be more partisanship. We're going to get more partisanship than we had before. And there are a couple of reasons for this. For one, because you now have a Republican faction in the House, a majority group, a majority faction, that is very heavily influenced by candidates with Tea Party support. They are going to be positioned philosophically in a way that makes compromise with Democrats very, very difficult. In other words, the philosophical differences, the philosophical chasm is going to grow. They're also facing a political situation that makes it extremely difficult to seek compromise, because part of the political agenda, having won the House, is to win the whole thing in 2 years. And the way Republicans do that is by trying to block Barack Obama and trying to block Senate Democrats who still control that chamber. So there's really very little political motivation on most big issues. I don't think that's the case for everything, but I do think it's the case for most big issues. And then, on the Democratic side, one of the big losers on Tuesday was a group we call Blue Dog Democrats. The Blue Dog Democrats are conservative Democrats, really self-styled corporate Democrats. Democrats who have a corporate-friendly agenda, take a lot of big money. They were wiped out. The Blue Dog Caucus was wiped out. Their numbers were cut in half. But the Progressive Caucus in the House, which was larger than the Blue Dogs, lost only 4 members, which is to say, you now have a smaller House Democratic caucus. They're in the minority. They have no power, but they're going to be more liberal. So the divisions between the two sides are now going to intensify going into the new Congress. I think as a result of that, the next 2 years are likely to be the inverse of the last 2 years. Over the last 2 years, President Obama spent a lot of time legislating, very little time campaigning. He's not going to do much legislating anymore. That leaves open a lot of time to campaign. I think it's fair to say that whatever agenda he may have had is now done. There's absolutely nothing he can propose that will make it through the House. So he's now in a political situation, as are the Democrats, where the 2012 election, which started in earnest yesterday, is now going to be front and center in terms of what Democrats try to accomplish. And what they're going to try to accomplish is they're going to try to fashion a message over the next 2 years to distinguish themselves from Republicans, because they're going to have to go to the electorate in 2 years, and they're going to have to say, give us another chance. We want you to give it back to us, because we think the other guys didn't give you what you want. So we're going to have a lot of squabbling, and we're going to have a lot of, I think there'll be a lot of acrimony. Let me, if I could, I think this might actually help make the next point. When we look ahead at the challenges faced by both parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, because they each face a very specific challenge within their own caucus. When we look ahead at the challenges, I think we can understand those challenges if we understand the forces that came out to create the wave on Tuesday, and what the different elements of the electorate were saying. Because if we understand that, we can understand really what's going on in the future going forward within each of the two parties. Really, two groups of voters made up the Republican majorities. The one group is the Tea Party group, the group that was really juiced and really energized. The other group is the unaffiliated, unaligned voters, the independent swing voters. Now, what makes the wave is when your energized base gets together with that group in the middle, and they all vote the same way. 4 years ago, independent voters voted overwhelmingly for Democrats. 2 years ago, overwhelmingly for Democrats. This time, overwhelmingly for Republicans. Those voters shift around. Now, the thing to remember is those voters were asking for something different than the base voters, the Tea Party voters. The Tea Party voters object to the Obama agenda, and they object to the role of government in our lives. The swing voters, the independent voters, want jobs. They want the economy to get better. They're angry. They're worried. They don't see how anyone in Washington is listening to them or responding to their needs. Now, these are two different sets of demands. What these two groups want is different. The challenge for House Republicans is going to be to find a way to govern that addresses both these needs. The dilemma comes in when the things that they would need to do to address the one group could conceivably undermine their relationship with the other. And there are a couple of prominent places where Republicans are going to have to tread very carefully. For instance, the Tea Party talks about cutting government, cutting the size of government. Now, this is not a new issue in politics. Politicians talk about cutting the size of government all the time. The problem comes when you actually try to do it. Because, where do you cut? The largest portions of the budget are entitlement spending and defense. Well, are you going to cut Social Security? Are you going to cut Medicare? Some Republican candidates ran on positions similar to that. Will they actually do it? If they do it, is that what the swing voters want? Probably not. What do you do, if you don't do that, where do you cut? The only thing that's left in the budget that you can even touch would be a lot of domestic spending that has small but very tenacious constituencies. So it's just not really politically feasible to do it. Will Tea Party candidates still insist on doing it nonetheless? Will Republican leadership allow it? How does that work? We don't really know. So that's one of the things that's going to challenge Republicans. Or spending. What do we do about spending? Well, let me give you a statistic from the exit polls. that I found very interesting. Over 1/3 of the electorate on Tuesday, 37%, wants Congress to spend more money to create jobs. Let me repeat that. 37% of the electorate on Tuesday wants Congress to spend more money to create jobs. And of those, 30% voted Republican. Well, now what? How do you reconcile that with what Tea Party candidates are saying they want to do, which is absolutely not another dime? There's even discussion about the debt ceiling. You have Republicans, some very prominent ones, like Rand Paul, saying, no, I won't vote to increase the debt ceiling. Well, if we don't increase the debt ceiling, then we run the risk of defaulting as a nation. Wall Street's not going to want that. And there are some very strong connections between Wall Street and establishment Republicans. They're not going to want it. But the Tea Party's insisting. What do? How do they reconcile that? That, to me, is the big political challenge for the Republicans going forward. The Democrats are going to have a different challenge. The Democrats have this division between blue dogs and progressives, of which President Obama is neither, really. He's been attacked by both groups, so it's a pretty good sign that neither one actually includes him as one of theirs. I said earlier that the blue dogs were decimated, and they were. They're still a presence. The progressives will be a stronger presence. They will probably pressure the administration to move rhetorically in a more progressive direction. Now, in an odd way, Obama is liberated from some of the constraints he faced over the first 2 years precisely because he can no longer get anything done. When you're trying to legislate, you have to bring groups together. It's very hard to do that. But when you're in campaign mode, it's basically rhetorical. And Obama's always been very comfortable in campaign mode. And I think we'll see a lot of it. Now, progressives are going to pressure the president to take a progressive stand. What does that mean? How is that different from liberalism? Well, the progressive critique is that the Democratic Party failed in this election, not because it did too much, but because it didn't go far enough. Because it didn't take on entrenched interests that sought to protect the status quo in healthcare, Wall Street reform, energy, you name it. That Obama brought those interests to the table and cut deals in a traditional sense. So progressives get very angry when they hear pundits say that the election is a referendum on Obama's progressive politics. Because they'll say, hey, wait a minute, what progressive politics? The guy's not a progressive. He's not listening to us. He's not doing what we said. The big debate in the Democratic Party is going to be a political one, where the progressives are going to assert their newfound strength. I suspect the White House will resist. And whoever wins that battle will go a long way to shaping the message that the Democrats take to the electorate in 2 years. Obama, I suspect, is going to be inclined to defend his record and to say, using his metaphor, give me the keys back again. What I did the first time was working, and it's better than what you've got now. And progressives are going to push him to say, not let's do it again, but let's go further. Let's go in a different direction, to offer something different to the country. So the challenge there is going to be figuring out, as a party, which direction they want to go in. I told you I would talk a little bit about where things stand in the scheme of things. The fact that this is the third wave election in a row, and what that means. Well, we have seen elections like this before, maybe not of this magnitude, but we've seen elections where the incumbent party takes a hit in the midterms, and then comes back strong 2 years later. We saw it in 1982 when President Reagan was in office. The country was in a very deep recession. People were angry. They took it out on Republicans in the midterm. Pundits were saying Reagan is dead, he's done. What's wrong with him? He can't communicate. They actually said that. He can't communicate with people. He's too detached. 2 years later, he carries 49 states. Clinton, 94. There were other things going on in 94, but the economy was bad, not as bad as 92, certainly not as bad as now. Same kind of thing. Democrats kicked out. Clinton comes back, says, you know what? I gotta work with these guys. He does. Basically what happens is the economy gets better. And it gets better in a hurry. So what happens is like what happened in 82. Both the new congressional majority and the president get credit for it. President's reelected, and in Congress the other party consolidates its majority. All things being equal, if the problems in our economy are cyclical, and things are actually going to get better, noticeably better, the unemployment rate really comes down, then I suspect that's the dynamic you would see. However, if the problem in the economy is more structural, in the sense that things are not simply getting better on their own, then those two elections are not a good model for trying to figure out what's going to happen next. And in fact, under a circumstance like that, it's conceivable that we can start talking about the inability of both political parties to address these fundamental bedrock economic issues. Remember, those swing voters were saying, it's the economy, stupid. Get me jobs. Make it better. And now they voted for Republicans, and they're expecting both the Democratic president and the Republican House to make it better. What happens if they can't? What happens if they don't? Could we have another wave election? Man, we're getting whiplash. And we keep having these wave elections. This is unusual. It's unusual. It's an indication that the parties are not able to deal with these fundamental problems. And there's something else going on. I just want to give you some data here. Excuse me a second. The other thing that's going on that leaves open the possibility that 2 years from now could be another wave again is that we're seeing very interesting distinctions between the off year and the presidential year electorate. Some of these differences are old, they happen all the time, so they're built into the system. They are structural in that sense. We know that Democratic voters tend to turn out much less than Republican voters during midterm years. We know seniors tend to vote more frequently in midterms than in presidential years. That's not news. That's been the case for a long time. What's different, though, is the patterns that these different groups exhibit. The groups that turn out in the midterm and the groups that don't. Let me read you some data here. 2008, 130 million people voted. Tuesday, 82.5 million people voted. Right? So 47.5 million people voted, did not vote on Tuesday. That did vote 2 years ago. That's a huge difference in the electorate. And the differences are not consistent across the board. Listen to this. The electorate in 2008, 74% white, 13% black, 9% Latino. On Tuesday, 78% white, swing at 4 points. 10% black, 8% Latino. So it was a wider electorate. Age, 2008, 18 to 29-year-olds actually made up a slightly larger share of the electorate than seniors. 18% compared to 16%. On Tuesday, 11% of the electorate was 18 to 29. 23% was 65 and older. And those seniors, who once upon a time were Democrats, voted Republican, reliably Republican. If you look at the Obama voters, the older you go through the age brackets, the weaker his support. Ideology. Liberals made up 22% of the electorate the year Obama was elected. Not much difference on Tuesday, 20%. The difference was between moderates and conservatives. In 2008, 44% of the electorate considered itself moderate, 34% conservative. On Tuesday, 39% moderate, 41% conservative. It was an older, whiter, more conservative electorate. In fact, if the electorate on Tuesday had been the electorate in 2008, McCain would be president. When people were asked in exit polls, how did you vote in 2008, McCain had a slight advantage. But we know he lost by 6 points. That's the difference. Some of that difference is structural, which is to say, the electorate in 2012, when it gets larger, is likely to contain a disproportionately larger share of the Obama voters that were missing this time around. So one of the challenges then for both parties is to position themselves to compete in that electorate. And that's an electorate that would have been less amenable to the outcome that we saw on Tuesday. It's a harder electorate for Republicans to run it, which means that if moderate voters do not get the economic relief that they're looking for, and if base voters in the Republican Party, Tea Party voters, aren't satisfied with the way Republicans are running Congress, we already know the electorate is likely to look quite different 2 years from now. It's not inconceivable that you could be looking at another wave. But how many waves? How many waves can we have? How many waves can we have before people start to get seasick? At what point do the parties begin to respond? Because both parties are dealing with this. Are we going to see a group splinter off? It's hard to know. The Tea Party is both a grassroots and a top-down movement. There's a lot of big money in it. That big money is affiliated with the Republican Party. But the grassroots sentiment is not. The grassroots sentiment in the Tea Party is basically using the Republican Party as a host organism. Would they vote if they're not satisfied? And if they did, would they have the institutional means to challenge Republicans on their own? I don't know. What about progressives? Progressives have always been dedicated to rebuilding the Democratic Party in their image. What if they don't make a lot of progress in a 2-year period when the president isn't really trying to get anything done? So this is their moment. What are they going to do? Where are they going to go? I don't know. What I am saying is that we're living in interesting times, that we are living in uncertain times, and that our politics reflect that. So we had our third wave. We had our third wave in a row on Tuesday. We had our Riptide election, where the undercurrent serves as a cautionary sign of what may happen as we go forward. And now we have to let it play out. So let me turn it over to you guys. Do you have any questions? Sure. You can get that cool echo effect going.
Okay. I just basically wanted to know that how do you think the election in 2012 is going to go? Obama goes for re-election with the voters that voted now for the midterm election, added with the voters that voted in 2008 to make it an interesting election. Like, how do you think that's going to turn out?
It's a great question. There are a lot of unknowns. I think that the first thing that we have to be aware of is that the electorate is likely to look different. But, it's not just enough to have people voting. You have to give them a reason to vote for you. So one of Obama's biggest jobs now is going to be to figure out how to get his base voters enthusiastic about it. And this is where, he really had a difficult time over the first 2 years of his administration, because he's trying to build governing coalitions. And governing is just totally different from campaigning. It's a completely different entity. So he's trying to build governing coalitions, and in order to do that, you have to make trade-offs. And you can't be out there all the time, throwing fireballs, which is what your base always wants. Your base always wants the red meat. They want you to get excited, and they want you to, you can't do that. The question is, and it's not his style to be combative, but he can be quietly combative. The question is, does he draw a line in the sand with Republicans? Does he stand up for things that in the past he said he believes in? I think if he does, he'll get his base motivated. I think if he engages in efforts to compromise on things that the base finds important, I think he endangers himself. Okay. Other questions? Hi.
Who on the Republican side do you think is going to try and run for the election?
Oh, good question. Who do I think is going to run on the Republican side? Well, I think you're already seeing a few people out there. Excuse me a second. I think. Sorry. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry about this loss of a voice. I think that you're going to see the field divide naturally into two groups. There are going to be traditional Republicans and Tea Party Republicans. And the traditional Republicans are going to be backed by moneyed interests, and the Tea Party Republicans are going to have a lot of grassroots enthusiasm behind it. So, for instance, Mitt Romney never stopped running. He's still running. And he's going to make the claim that it's his turn. He finished second to John McCain. Republicans historically have gone to the person who's next in line. And you'll probably see a couple of other names that you know like that, running to fill that particular space. Then you'll find the Tea Party candidates, like, everybody wonders, will Sarah Palin run? She is the patron saint. And we don't know. It looks almost ridiculous to say we don't know. She's doing very, very well personally. She's making a lot of money. She's a presence. She's very important politically. She's important to the political narrative. So she may run to try to fill that space. It's possible that Mike Huckabee might run again. Newt Gingrich has made noises about running. I think he's been positioning himself to try to fill that space if Sarah Palin doesn't. And there'll be some other names that you don't know probably as well. But I suspect that's what your field is going to look like.
For the past 20 years, I think for the past 20 years, the U.S. has been in the process of deindustrialization. And so geographically, that occurs disproportionately in the Midwest. So, and that process is unlikely to change. That's right. So I agree with you that we're likely to see another wave in 2012, and as the process continues, yet another, and yet another.
Can't go on forever.
So what happens to these people who get so disaffected with and frustrated with both parties?
Yeah, what happens? And that really is the question. The issue of deindustrialization is exactly, you're exactly right. If you look at, again, where Democrats lost their majority, it was in those states in the Midwest, where the jobs are gone, and there's the sentiment that they're never coming back. And they're never coming back. So how do you retrain people for a new economy? I think that type of dislocation is really what's driving a lot of the convulsions that we're seeing in our politics right now, because the parties are not able, they're not set up to respond to that issue. Now, you basically, it's not that there aren't ideas out there. There are ideas. But the ideas that have been tried so far have been more traditional in the sense that they're the kinds of ideas that you can get bipartisan support for. But what you're hearing on the right now, the really energized right, is look, the way you deal with that is you let markets take care of it. You let the market take care of it. You don't do anything. You just stop spending, you lower taxes, and you cut back government. And we've never really done that in the extreme because the politics makes it impossible. On the left, on the progressive left, what they're saying is we have to retrain people, and you have to make investments, and that's going to require a lot of money. So you do the opposite. You actually need bigger government in order to invest in a new economy, in order to get people, give people opportunities that they can then can't do what they used to do, but they can prepare for the 21st century. The political problem there is, again, it doesn't work in our current political system to be able to implement that. In fact, right now, the whole idea of spending, even though you saw about a third of the electorate on Tuesday wants spending, I don't think we're going to get it. I just don't think it's politically feasible. So I don't know what's going to give, but I think eventually something has to give because these long-term structural problems aren't going to go away. And people aren't going to be happy until their lives get better. And so eventually politics comes around to it. But it can be very dislocated. And I suspect it's going to be a very bumpy ride to get there. Hi. Excuse me.
Do you think if campaigning-wise in 2012, if usually Republicans run on a campaign of fear to kind of win over voter support, the Democrats, with the progressive push for a different kind of politics, would use the same fear tactic to gain voter support? Like, for example, tackling the Midwest and saying Republicans, want to cut taxes, want to give these businesses more freedom. Meanwhile, these businesses are responsible for outsourcing their jobs. What if they ran on a fear-based campaign like that? Do you think you'll see a lot more of a voter turnout like that?
You may. One of the ugly things about politics is it always helps to be against something. And it's really the case that, Republicans had a very big target this year, and they exploited it very well. But 2 years ago, Democrats had a very big target, and they exploited it very well. So now everybody's going to have a target because now we've got divided government again. So I do think politically you do play to that, either to fear or to anger when you've got somebody where you can point your finger at the other side and say, see, if they hadn't done that, then life would be better now. So yeah, I do think so.
In 2006 and 2008, there was a lot of talk that the Republican base had pulled the candidates too far to the right, and that by the time they came to a general election, they were unelectable. But it seems like they've come back pretty strong in this election. So do you think that was other factors, or do you think that maybe we were wrong that they were less electable because they were so far to the right?
So I think what you're asking then is in 06 and 08, you're saying that Republicans have gone too far to the right. There's a very big debate within the Republican Party about that very point. And one of the things that you hear, Eric Cantor, for instance, who's about to become House Majority Leader, one of the things he said was, we didn't really get it right. We weren't Republican enough the last time. So now that the people have given us a second chance, we're going to show you what conservative government really is. So that debate rages within the Republican Party as well. And now, again, that's rhetoric. We'll have to see how that translates into governing. This is the thing, guys. The thing to remember is there's governing and there's there's campaigning, and they require two completely different sets of skills. So the real challenge when you talk about the right, the real challenge for the Tea Party right is this. Those that say no compromise ever. Well, governing is all about compromise. You can't govern without compromise. But if you're philosophically opposed to it, then compromise feels like defeat. And the question is, now that we're moving from a campaign mode to a governing mode, where you have a strong Tea Party representation in the House majority, is the leadership able to convince its junior members, and by extension, the voters that put them there, that it's okay to take something, even if you can't get everything? Or is compromise going to be seen as heresy? I don't know. That to me is one of the big outstanding questions. And the answer to that question will tell us a lot about A, how Republicans intend to move in the House, and B, politically moving forward, whether they can keep their coalitions together. Because I don't think it's possible to keep the swing voters in line if you do the things that the Tea Party wants to do. I don't think you can have both those things. The question is, can you keep the Tea Party in line and govern in a way that will please the swing voters? See, that's normally what a party wants to do. Normally what they'll do is they'll do what they can to keep that middle group happy.
Any noticeable difference in the media coverage of this election versus either 2008 or the previous midterm election?
In 2008 it was hideous, this year it was horrible. It's very difficult to get a sense of what's going on in a 24/7 cable news environment. It's very, very difficult. So what you end up with is simplified narratives. And sometimes simplified narratives take on a life of their own. And they often are very, let's say, uninstructive. That happened both times. It's the world we live in.
Prior to this election, it was said that if the Republicans were to regain control in Congress, that Obama in 2012 would just use that against them because inevitably things aren't going to get any better. Does that change now that only the House was taken back by the Republicans? Because he still does have a majority in the Senate. So,
Yeah, good question. Well, for one thing, let's go back to the media question. That's correct that Republicans took back the House, didn't take back the Senate. But the media narrative is all about the Republican takeover of the House. If it wasn't, then this would be called a split decision. But instead, it's being called a historic vote. And I think that's accurate, but I think that also focuses attention on the House. And the media can't take its eyes off of a fight. Well, we're going to be seeing a lot of them. And a lot of it's going to take place between the House and the White House. And I think that's where a lot of the activity is going to be. In terms of Obama running against Republicans in the House, this is going to sound a little strange, but I actually think that the real, this looks like a nightmare scenario for Democrats. I think the real nightmare scenario for Democrats, especially if you believe that the economy isn't about to get better anytime soon, would have been losing 36, 37, 38 seats, maintaining nominal control of the House, being able to get nothing done, because they couldn't get anything done with a 39-seat majority, and then getting blamed for everything. Had that happened, then the outpouring that you saw yesterday would have simply built up. And it would have broken ashore 2 years from now when you have both the White House and both houses in play. So that didn't happen. So I think you're right. I think now we're going to see the big dividing line between the Republicans in the House and the White House, and we'll see how it plays out.
My question has to do more with the electorate themselves, in specific Latino voters, and the role that you think that Latinos and Hispanics would play in 2012, because we saw, for instance, with Nevada with Sharon Angle, and the outpouring of Latino votes that may have helped Harry Reid. How do you think that the Republicans will be able to balance trying to keep in court a Latino or Hispanic base when they have a tough immigration stance or campaign that they're trying to push as well?
Do you want to answer that? Sure.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, especially Hispanic, basically, everyone's talking about how it's growing, and there was a poll taken among Hispanic Americans on what was the most important issue. This was actually Dr. Wilson's class. She talked about this, and the most important issue to them was jobs, the economy, healthcare. Fifth came immigration. So just the fact that a lot of politicians are aiming at immigration, just for that, a lot of Latino voters aren't turned off by that, but they see more important issues. So.
Well, the Latino vote is and has been heavily a Democratic vote. Harry Reid would not have been reelected without an unbelievable Latino turnout, which really defied what we saw in much of the rest of the country. I think that, to answer your question, how can Republicans appeal to that vote given their stand on immigration? I don't think they can. And I think I think this is something, by the way, that George W. Bush understood, and I think it's something that congressional Republicans, because it doesn't play to their immediate interests, haven't acted on. They have not acted on it. I think this is a longer-term issue for Republicans who ultimately need to appeal to a more diversified electorate. Take California. The electorate in California on Tuesday was majority-minority, which reflects the growing demographics of California. California re-elected a Democratic senator, replaced a Republican governor with a Democrat, lost 0 seats in the House. That's what the Republican Party is up against going forward. And I think it is a very serious and important issue.
What's the chance of a significant third-party presence in the upcoming years?
The third-party question. It's a good question. It's a very good question. I think that the likelihood of third-party sentiment going forward will be very strong. And in particular, if the major parties continue to appear unable to deal with the structural economic problems we face. You know, after a while, it's not enough to say, give us a 12th chance and we really promise we'll get it right this time. We really mean it this time. That's not enough. And I'm exaggerating, of course, but I do think there comes a time when people start to look elsewhere. The question, though, is who forms the party, who funds the party, and how successful can they be? Remember, the election laws in this country were written by Democrats and Republicans. They make it very difficult for another party to challenge them. But in terms of third-party sentiment, would I be surprised to see the 2012 election a multi-candidate race? No, I would not be surprised to see that. I'm not saying a third party would win, but I'm saying it wouldn't surprise me at all. Are we okay? Then I thank you very much.